December Tynwald is shaping up to be a slightly less verbose affair than its November neighbour, with just 3 main government motions on the order paper, but 1 or 2 meaty motions tabled by backbenchers. In one of those, Stu Peters stands like King Canute against the net zero tide. Stu explains why shortly, and we'll hear from the new DOI Minister, Michelle Hayward, who tells us about her department plan. But first, Douglas Central MHK Anne Corlett. You're not one of the more vocal and visible members of the House of Keys, but you've got quite a lot on your plate, haven't you?
Yeah, I am very busy, and you know that's my style, and I do face criticism sometimes for this, but it's very hard to change the way you work, and I always feel if I'm driven to say something, then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Whereas drawing away for no reason sometimes, or just to be repetitive about something someone else has said.
Because, of course, that's the other criticism that members get is, there's so-and-so spouting off again. He's always on the radio or whatever. So there is a bit of a damned if you do and damned if you don't.
That's
there?
Right. So you've got to strike a balance, I think. And you know, actually, perhaps I haven't got quite the balance right, but I do always feel, you know, actions speak louder than words.
Yeah. So what kinds of areas are you involved with? I know you're on DFE, the Department for Enterprise. What do you do in there?
So Enterprise, my responsibilities in Enterprise are Digital Agency and Locate, which are actually really, really interesting and very, very different, actually. Digital is... To be fair, I am a bit of a digital dinosaur, but I don't need to know all the techie stuff. It's about the policy. It's about Well, anyone listening to these the programs that I make know that I'm not much. I can do what's necessary. Yeah. And actually, some of the stuff that's going on is mind blowing, and it's really exciting stuff. And the fact that you can't actually understand the very technical parts of it doesn't mean you're not excited and can't see what benefit these things would bring. AI in particular at the minute is there's some really great stuff going on, and it really, some of it is hugely exciting and positive. It's a little bit scary, isn't it? Because there are negatives to it, but the things that I think it will help to streamline services and make us far more efficient.
And one of the interesting elements of working in DFE is that you work with members of the private sector. So it's not just the political bubble, which sometimes can be a problem because politicians talk to politicians and reinforce political views. And the next thing you know, you get to an election and realise you're out of touch with the population. So actually having that direct contact on a regular basis with private sector people is
and I can't speak highly enough of actually the people that come in voluntarily to work on the agency boards. Their input is absolutely so valuable, and it does give you that different perspective and keeps you kind of out of the bubble, if you like. So it's a different way of working to many other departments. If I'm honest, I feel really uncomfortable in Enterprise sometimes because my passions lie around the social policy, the social justice and fairness. And, sometimes when you're deciding whether to give grants to things or whatever, it can be an uncomfortable place to be. But I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because
yes, it is.
If they can justify to me why we should do this, and then I can justify it to others, then I think that's you should never sit comfortably, really.
Certainly, in my view, and I've been around a bit in politics. It should never be comfortable. It should always feel as though this is a difficult role that you're fulfilling.
Yeah, it is a bit of a love-hate relationship, and it's kind of. It's perversely enjoyable because you're able to provide a challenge and make people whether it's members of the board or members of the department or officers, justify why we should do that.
So in terms of the digital agency then, what kinds of things, I mean, if you were able to have a crystal ball and look several years, maybe decades into the future, what is going to change? Bearing in mind, we were all told back in the 80s and 90s that computers were going to revolutionise the way we work, and it took quite a while for that to happen.
I think AI is probably working faster because people see the benefits of it very quickly. But for me, it is about being able to streamline services and make them more efficient. I mean, obviously, there is worry around job loss and having to retrain to do other things. But Digital were running some AI sessions, awareness sessions, and I went to a few of them. And I just remember one of the presenters opening one of the sessions said, it's you don't need to fear that AI will take your job. What you do need to fear is that somebody who can use AI will take your job. So I don't think it's going to wipe out jobs quite in the way that some people fear.
Yeah. And
I think it will work to our advantage more than our disadvantage.
Of course, the other thing to remember is that we have pretty much full employment on the island. There are more people being sought to fill roles than there are actual people looking for roles.
And there will always be a huge amount of jobs that need humans to do them. So we're not going to be replaced by AI because that has its limitations too, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then the other area, Locate, how is that going? Because I'm guessing part of the difficulties that particularly the Treasury Minister has at the moment is we kind of aren't significantly growing the economy in the way that perhaps if we go back 3 years when the Council of Ministers was formed and the bold initiatives and economic strategies, and we can grow our way out of the economic difficulties we're in. It's not moving as quickly as I think people hoped.
I agree, and I to me, the wrong narrative is around this. Growing the population will solve all our problems. No, it won't. Problems will be solved by increasing productivity, by efficiency, by streamlining processes, services. That's the way to do this. And let the population grow naturally. There's jobs out there that we need to bring people in because we haven't got people here for. But I think the wrong narrative is around it because constant criticism from the public about growing the population and the figures that are attached to it. I think we need to stop that and take a different tack on it. And for Locate, for me, the way I see it is it's that facilitator to try to get people into the jobs that are available that we require people to come in for.
Because there are lots of those roles, aren't there? There's unfortunately, there aren't enough trained Manx people who are looking for work to fill all these roles.
That's always been the way. That's not something new, is it? That has always been the case. We're a small island, a small population. We don't have everybody we need to do every job we need them to do. So importing people has always been necessary for us. It's not anything new. I think it's the numbers that are being attached to it that are actually quite worrying for people. Particularly when they can't access services and they just see it as, 10,000 people more, what are we going to do?
Yeah, and I mean, I guess then what you're saying is that maybe Council of Ministers got the messaging wrong.
I honestly do think that is it. And, it's not too late to change that message.
Well, it does appear that Comyn seems to be rowing back pretty hard. Or they would be winning a gold in the backpedalling Olympics, wouldn't they?
That's right.
On that particular figure of, I think it was growing the population to 100,000. And at the time it was announced, I thought, that's a strange thing to be your target headline figure. But
if the population grows naturally, then actually the services and hopefully the housing that we need will grow with it. But it kind of, that's what's in people's mind, is this figure that there's no control over, that is just, we're imagining we're going to reach anytime soon, which we are not.
And you mentioned there housing. Of course, you're also a member of the Housing and Communities Board.
That's right.
That's another area where perhaps the delivery hasn't been as good as perhaps the people might have hoped at election time.
I think you're right in saying that people were expecting more, but I think actually what was essential was a needs assessment. If we don't know what we need, then how are we going to provide it? So that has been done now. So we kind of know what we need. But even some of that is a little bit, it needs tweaking because things change all the time. But we have to start delivering.
And how is that going to happen? Because there was talk of a, a housing association, and that the talk has been there, but it doesn't seem to be a lot of progress with that.
Well, no, and we have, it is moving along. Something will come to Tynwald by April with regard to a housing association. I do wish I was a little bit more convinced that that was the way to go, and maybe by April I'll be there. What I don't want people to see is that we create a housing association as another body away from government, and really all it's going to do is take care of DOI's housing. Because why would we create another board, another association that simply deals with getting housing out of DOI? But I do think housing needs to come out of DOI because it's not in the right place where it is.
Is it? Maybe this is a bit too radical and revolutionary to suggest, but do you think maybe government should be talking to the existing housing providers, particularly in relation to social housing on the island, or public sector housing, if you want? Local authorities, there are several that have very large stocks of housing, and they feel that the rules and regulations that govern the way they do their business is what holds them back.
And it absolutely does, because it is the wrong formula. It's the wrong way to do it, absolutely. And more negotiation needs to take place there. But what I wouldn't like to see is that you go ahead and form a housing association with the intention of forcing local authorities to put their housing stock into it, because they will resist that at all costs. And I can't blame them.
And apart from anything else, each of the local authorities in the island is a separate legal entity, and giving up their largest asset is not something that I imagine that they could really do legally.
They will resist that completely. And I served for a short time really on Douglas Council, and I understand why they would resist that.
I mean, has your board had the opportunity to talk to local authorities?
No, DOI have really taken that on board rather than the board themselves. But that, you're right, actually, that is something that maybe would be a good thing to really...
Yeah. And are there any local authority members or housing officers sitting on the board?
Housing officers are always in there, but they're DOI.
Right.
So there's DOI, and then we have the health minister sits on it, DOI minister sits on it, I sit on it, David Ashford at the moment sits on it. So insofar as housing and infrastructure and health, that's good. They need to be there. But and of course we've got lay members. But I think it's difficult for lay members because they don't have all the information that I have as a member, and I don't have all the information that the ministers that sit on there have. So unless we're all on a level playing field here, how are we really going to make a difference?
It is. I mean, it was a great idea setting up a board like this back in, when was it, 2021. And we've seen subsequently the Climate Transformation Board has been subsumed into DEFRA, which has been, I think, painted as, well, the board has now fulfilled its useful function, which could be. It's been a great success. It's done all it needed to do, and now...
And DEFRA can take over from there.
Or it could be a recognition that it wasn't achieving what it was set up to deliver. Is that the case, do you think, with the housing?
Well, I would assume that if a housing association, if Tynwald decided that was the way that we were going to go, that then the Housing and Communities Board would be within that, or collapse down, and that would take over. I mean, it's hard to see that you would need both things, really.
Right.
You know, it would be duplicating a lot of stuff that and when you're duplicating, you cause an expense that you don't require.
Yeah. You also obviously work hard in the Tynwald, in the parliamentary side of things, and you're on the PAC, the Public Accounts Committee, which is probably the most important committee of Tynwald. It is the one that really can dig into the financial side of some of the things that government does. So that is a pretty time-consuming, I guess.
There's lots of papers to read, and it is quite time-consuming to go through. I think we are a little bit... Things are perhaps a little bit easy now with the Tynwald Auditor General.
And how does that work, that relationship?
Well, he sits in on the PAC meeting, so, you can ask advice. And, of course, you can go to him for advice at any time. But that's in its infancy, too. He's just developing his team around that. So, but I do think it's a good thing.
Because he was... the role was established with a view to saving substantial sums of money, wasn't it? Is there any evidence yet?
I haven't seen any so far. But I'm hoping that what was expected will materialise, because there's no point in having that kind of offers if it isn't going to save at least what it's costing.
Yeah.
At least. I mean, it needs to be considerably over, doesn't it? Otherwise, there is no point to it.
Some of the big items that government has been struggling with, so for example the Promenade scheme, the Liverpool Sea Terminal, these are matters that the Public Accounts Committee ends up having to pick over and make recommendation. Certainly one of the things in my previous experience in Tynwald was that committees have to make recommendations, and of course they make recommendations which generally adds to the bureaucracy, which then slows the pace of government down and adds to the cost. Is that something PAC is very much aware of and trying to avoid?
I don't think it's actively trying to avoid it, but I think members of that committee are conscious of that, certainly. And let's be honest, that's been thrown out as a beware. In the last Tynwald, when this dyslexia committee was set up, and the desk minister, I agree with this committee, but be careful with your recommendations because we haven't got any money. So, that is being thrown into committee when they're set up as a yes, but beware what you recommend. But actually that shouldn't stifle the recommendation, because at the end of the day, even though you can't afford it, you still should know what you should be doing, shouldn't you? Because if you tailor it completely as a scrutiny committee to what you think can be afforded, then you're not doing your job properly. And that is about a recommendation, isn't it? You can't say, well, I know you can't afford this, so I'm not going to say you should do it. It should still be out there that is actually what you should be doing, and find a way, if you can, to do it.
That was Douglas Central MHK and Call It. Middle MHK Stu Peters is calling for a rethink on net zero. You have an item on the Tynwald Order paper which effectively is suggesting, I think, that the whole government machine that is kicked into gear to develop or to reach net zero for the Isle of Man is a bit of a sham. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a bit strong. I'm not suggesting that it's a sham. I'm suggesting that there are ways and ways to do things. And given the financial constraints that the government's got at the moment, there's no money for schools or for healthcare or for infrastructure, that we ought to reconsider our priorities. And I don't believe that climate change is a priority. So I think we need to take a long, hard look at all these things that we've signed up to, probably with the best will in the world, and with a good intention. But a lot of countries around us have now decided that they're going to pull back on things like this. So the UK, Scotland, various European countries have now said, well, 2030, 2035, 2050, maybe we're not going to meet those targets, and maybe we shouldn't anyway, because we're in a grave risk of doing damage to our economies. And I believe that that's something that we should do in the Isle of Man. I think we need to adapt to the good old trade allure to climate change.
The Labour Party, though, the UK Labour Party has just announced that it is going to be even more ambitious in its targets for 2035. So actually, our largest neighbour is going to be pushing even harder on this.
Well, and that proves the point that I'm going to try and make in December Tynwald, that this isn't science, this is political ideology. So the Labour Party in the UK is absolutely committed to destroying everything to try and meet these climate change targets, to build windmills, to spend fortunes that there is no discernible return for in terms of a reduction in temperatures going up or a reduction in CO2. It's all a case of, let's just go at this hell for leather. By comparison, now that Donald Trump is going back in the US, he's actually said, now, forget all that. We ain't going to do it anymore because it's damaging our economy, and the economy comes first. And people will say, well, that's all very well, think about the grandchildren and the earth's going to be on fire. It's a load of nonsense, all that, and has been ever since, Al Gore in 2006. There are a huge number of eminent scientists who disagree with the current narrative on climate change. And to me, it's a religion, it's a cult, and we need to take a much more pragmatic view of it.
It is, though, fair to say that there are steps that we can be taking, whether you agree or you disagree with climate change being a man-made phenomenon. You can insulate people's homes, and that's actually going to save them money, and potentially they're going to live in better sort of circumstances than they are when they're living in homes that leak energy. That we can do things to make our lives more sustainable, which actually are going to be beneficial to us. Surely to goodness those are good things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on the speech that I'm going to give in December Tynwald right now, and in it I plan to say that I'm I'm not a green person necessarily, but anything that's cleaner and greener, more sustainable, better for the planet, better for the Isle of Man primarily, is to be applauded. So if people think that windmills are going to do the job, which I very much doubt, then, fine. I'm happy for the windmills to go up, the wind turbines to go up, on the basis that it gives us an amount of energy independence from the UK. Because, I had a power cut at home in Santon on, I think it was Saturday night, Sunday night, whenever. And so the power was off for 2 hours, and it's only when that happens that you realise how absolutely dependent we are. Because I thought, the telly's gone off. I'll have a look at the computer. I'll get the iPad fired up and go online and have a look at a few websites. Of course, you can't do any of that. And the UK at the moment is talking about blackouts, brownouts, or whatever. They're talking about having to look at the way that they supply energy. They're talking about rationing it, maybe, because they can't supply the demand that they've got at the moment with what they've done. They've closed the nuclear power stations, the coal-fired power stations, and all of a sudden some genius has realised that there's not enough electricity anymore, especially since as a society we're using more and more electric for everything that we do. So, having an interconnector, to me, is maybe not the best idea, because let's face it, if they've got blackouts or brownouts or planned outages in the UK, who are they going to turn off first? Is it going to be, Doncaster or Douglas? And I'm pretty sure it's not going to be Doncaster.
So presumably, with the election of Donald Trump in America, is now a time for us in the Isle of Man to have a reset, a rethink? I'm guessing I know what answer you're going to give to this, but do you think that members of Tynwald, members of the Isle of Man government, will be prepared to listen to what you're saying and actually start to maybe row back a bit on some of these things and maybe reprioritise some of the more important stuff that you've been talking about?
Well, it's interesting, Phil, because right from first being elected, and part of my manifesto was that I thought a lot of this climate change was rubbish. I'm not disputing climate change, but our response to it, I think, has been rubbish all along. And usually when it's a Tynwald vote on things about climate change, it's a vote of 31-1, and I'm the one, usually, that votes against any of this stuff. We had something more recently where I think I got 4 people who voted along with me, and since I announced that I was going to bring this motion to Tynwald in December, I've had 3-4 members who've offered to second it for me. So I think that there is a bit more of a groundswell, and I'm not denying climate change. I'm not even going into climate change and whether or not the figures are all being fixed to provide the narrative that governments or these supra national organisations like the WHO and the WF and people like that want to promote. It's a case of we need to look at the Isle of Man. We need to look at what's good for us, and let's do all these things, but let's do them at a natural pace. Who came up with the figure of 2030, 2035, 2050? It was just people who wanted to push the agenda and set hard dates. And those hard dates could ruin our economy. And it's about time to say, hang on, let's still do it. Let's not stop any of the plans to do these things, but let them happen in their own time. When, electric cars are the same price as petrol or diesel cars, people will naturally choose to use them. Let's not force them to buy electric cars that are twice the price of the ICE alternative at the moment. And also, I don't believe that all the electricity on the Isle of Man, which is going to be the only fuel effectively in the future, should necessarily come from government or the MUA. I agree. Let's have more grants for people to insulate their homes. Let's allow people to put, let's have grants for solar panels or for windmills on chimney tops or whatever it is. Make the individual homeowner or tenant responsible for their own green initiatives rather than have this thing imposed from above.
I suspect that some of these dates do come from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
Oh, it'll be COP26 or COP out this or whatever it is. Yeah. But this is what I'm saying. This is a cult, and these people are trying to drive this with no thought to the consequences of it. As far as the people who are pro this, and let's face it, there are a huge number of jobs even in the Isle of Man government now that include the words climate change in the job description. And so all these people are, of course, mad keen to push this agenda. But, we've got to ask ourselves, is it for the people of the Isle of Man, or is it to virtue signal ourselves and to strut on the world stage and say, oh, well, we signed up to 2035 at the Paris or at the Glasgow or whatever COP thing. It's not for the people of the Isle of Man. And my job as a politician on the Isle of Man is to look after my people. It's not to keep Greta Thunberg and her chums happy.
I'm guessing the other 23 members of the House of Keys think that it is their job as well to look after the best interests of the Isle of Man. And as you've described, you're either in a minority of one, but perhaps that minority of one is increasing now. Surely to goodness the other members of the House of Keys are very much pursuing things that they think are in the best interests of the people. Are you suggesting perhaps that they have misjudged this?
Yes, I think so. And I've got some very good friends who are members of Tynwald who are absolutely opposed to everything that I say about this. And I respect their position on it because I know that it comes from the heart. I know that it comes from a good place. You know, that they've convinced themselves, or they've been convinced, that the world is about to set itself alight unless we do something by turning our gas boilers off or whatever it might be. My contention is that and the contention of a lot of very eminent scientists is that's nonsense. So sure, let's do things that are cleaner and greener and better for the environment. I'm absolutely on board with all that. But let's just, take these arbitrary dates out of the thing. Let's stop convincing ourselves that anything that we do on the Isle of Man is going to have any impact at all on climate change. And let's put that money back into things that we need to invest in at the moment, which are healthcare, education and infrastructure, just for three.
That was Middle MHK Stu Peters. Finally, the new DOI Minister, Michelle Haywood. So talking to the Honourable Michelle Haywood, MHK, does that sound good, or you're not really into that kind of thing?
See, the fact that I grin every time it doesn't come over on radio, does it? But it still feels very new and still feels very exciting and a bit confusing when everyone says it. And I look around and go, oh, that's me.
I guess because everyone thinks that they kind of know how to fill a pothole in and knows how to sort out a housing problem or empty a bin or whatever it may be. I guess that's why you have so many armchair experts advising the department, and generally not in a positive way.
Yeah, and it's a department with an absolutely huge brief that touches pretty much everyone's lives every day in a variety of ways. And when it works well, which it does most of the time, you don't really notice the fact that it's working well. And then when things go wrong, you're right, the armchair experts are all there with their solutions. And
it's almost like there's an expectation that the department should be performing to this standard, so potholes should be getting filled in, and various all the various things that the department does should be being done, and it's only when they're not done that people notice and then complain.
That's always the way. I think when I was first elected, you suddenly realise that your email inbox is full of awful messages about things going wrong for people because they've reached out to you as a member of the House of Keys, because you are almost a person of last resort, to signpost their way to access services and get help. And I had to pull myself back about a year into the role. You suddenly realise that, yes, your email is always going to be full of all these disaster stories and people needing your assistance. But actually, outside there, the rest of the world is kind of ticking along and is generally a fine place. And so you have to be careful that that noise that comes is not necessarily reflective of what we're achieving on the bigger scale. And this job will be no different.
And you've had a whole week now, almost a whole week, to get your head round the department. Have you decided yet on what your wish list of actions are going to be before the next elections? You've got just under 2 years to effect some sorts of change.
It's early days. In fact, my first meeting with the chief officer was for about 45 minutes on a Monday morning, and then I went straight into a Comyn workshop, and there's been a heavy agenda between being in the Keys and being in Comyn this week, which has pretty much knocked out most of my week. So I've been back down the department this morning, and we've had another 45 minutes. I'm back there this afternoon, but it'll be about 4 hours that I've managed this week, which is not enough to even start scratching the surface on it. We're working on a priority list of the things that the department think are the hot topics, stuff that's coming up in Tynwald, reports that are due, etc. And I'm delighted I've got a new political team in, and I'm due to sit down with them next week, and we'll come up with that sort of joint list of priorities that we want to push forward. Mindful that things have to fit into the island plan and they've got to fit into our budgets and things like that, but we'll work through and see what we want to achieve together.
And I should say, for anyone who's pondering this, because we're recording this the week before the interview actually will play out on Perspective. And I guess members of the public probably assume you're the Minister for Infrastructure, so you ought to know everything about the department because you're there 5-6 days a week. But it doesn't work out that way, does it? At the moment, I'm guessing council of ministers will be working on the detail now of what's going to go in the February budget, and one of the big areas of financial challenge is health. Education is not that far behind health in terms of big challenges. And then the next biggest spending area of government is DOI.
Yeah, that's true. There is a lot of work going on for the budget this year. It's a very tough year to be budgeting in. Things are not getting any easier necessarily. And so, you know yourself, you've been through it. Every department set their priorities. All the departments have been in a pitch to Treasury, and Treasury are trying to pull together some plan that, I don't say keep everyone happy, probably makes everyone equally miserable is probably the more where we're likely to land. But it's tough, and we're balancing a lot of priorities in there.
One of your first actions as DOI Minister in Tynwald, the only big government-related item on the order paper is your department's plan. It looks like Tim Krukle might even have had a hint that he was leaving shortly, because it's basically look what a great job we've done over the last year or two. It's one of the things that sometimes the department plans come in for criticism for. It is a great document for telling you just how much we're doing and across how many areas and how many miles of roads have been resurfaced and all the achievements that the department have had in the last year. And it is an impressive list of achievements. We're doing great stuff across lots of areas. What it's a little bit light on perhaps is where we're going, and actually I'm not necessarily bothered about that. You know, I'm new in the role, there's a new political team coming to support me, and actually that gives us some scope then to not be tied into what the former minister's priorities necessarily were, but to kind of set our own for a bit and to come up with what we hope to achieve in the next couple of years. And the new political team is?
I'm delighted to say that Mr. Hooper has joined, and Miss Farragher as well, and then Mrs. Kinnish is staying in post. So there'll be some shuffling around about delegations and responsibilities within the department, but I intend to have a little bit more sort of political oversight going on into the different divisions, and use the abilities of the team basically to help inform what we're doing and to drive things along and try and get some progress. There's certain things that are just stuck and we need to try and unlock, and if we can provide enough policy direction to do that, then we will.
The department has big challenges. I mean, the housing element sits within the department in terms of public sector housing. You've got the airport, and the airport particularly came in for quite a bit of criticism, although it seems to be getting a bit better now. And then you've got all the other elements. You've got local authority related issues. You've got the whole question about what we do about waste disposal, the incinerator, how long is that going to carry on, and yeah, there are loads of challenges, and I've probably missed a dozen more.
Oh yeah, I know, flood management, climate change responses, there's loads of it.
Yeah.
It is an absolutely huge brief, and I think having come from, it's probably more comparable to being in DEFRA than it is my time in Department of Health and Social Care, because the range of stuff is just so large, and so by necessity those teams are individual teams working within the big department, and the challenge is to pull all that together and make sure that everything is complementary about what's happening between the different teams, and they're at the points where they overlap, that they're heading in the same direction and things. So it's going to be a real exciting brief to get hold of.
And of course the area that the department often gets criticised for is the big capital schemes, the big projects. And of course the department tends to be the name that everyone goes after, whereas generally speaking on these big projects it's a team across government, including Attorney General's chambers, the Treasury and various others, depending on which project it is. How good are you at working collaboratively? Are you a team player?
Oh, definitely. I don't, happy to admit I don't have expertise in every area. You have to be pretty arrogant to claim you did. We've restructured how the big projects work. So we've got our project management unit, but obviously things go through SACIC within Treasury as well. So there's more control and more oversight on what happens there. But you're right. I mean, it does land with us that, that's who we're seen to be leading on these things, and we're the ones that will carry the can when things are over budget or late, or both in some cases.
So the department plan then, I mean, it's going to Tynwald. It is going to be debated, and if the new, relatively new Minister for Education, Daphne Kane's experience is anything to go by, you're probably going to get a fair amount of helpful criticism, maybe not so helpful in places as well. How do you think? How do you respond to that? How do you translate that as well so that the officers who inevitably feel that they're being directly criticised actually don't end up going into a shell and thinking, oh, well, why am I even bothering trying?
I think I'm looking forward to it, actually, and that sounds really odd. I'm taking a plan that I didn't write and didn't have a hand in to Tynwald, but what I'm looking forward is the feedback from my fellow members. Many of them have been in the department previously or have had to interact with the department in some ways, who will have a lot of things, a lot of learning points that we can take away. There will be noise in there, but there will be some golden nuggets of advice and steer that we can get from that. So I'm really looking forward to it as an opportunity for Tynwald to tell me exactly where we need, what they think we need to go, and to get that sort of political backing from them to develop stuff moving forward. So I'm not seeing it. It feels a bit bizarre presenting somebody else's plan. It is just Tynwald's to receive the plan anyway. I don't expect them to vote not to receive the plan. So we'll take away all of that feedback. We'll look at the Hansard afterwards, and we'll pick up on all those points, and that will feed into, for me, what's quite an exciting time, because this is the chance to set the direction now. So it'd be really handy to have that before Christmas. That gives us a chance to stop and reflect on what was said and come in January with a let's work out where we're going forward.
Stu Peters obviously was a member of the department, but he felt that your political perspectives were too far apart for him to work with you. Was he right, do you think?
Well, to be fair, every time he mentions anything to do with climate change within the post office context, I cheer, just because we know that he denies that climate change is real. And as a former environmental scientist, yes, he's right. We are absolutely like poles apart on that, and I don't think I'll ever persuade him that the data is real, the science is settled. Even if you showed him Manx data, which shows that we're losing our frost days, that the downpours are more sudden and more concentrated, that the wind is slightly changing direction and becoming stronger, storm day, all of those things that are the inevitable impacts of climate change that are real and we have to deal with, and I'll have to deal with, because it affects flood management, it affects my teams that go out and clear the roads when the trees fall down, it affects when roads get washed away and in sudden downpours. So all of those things, we were never going to reconcile over that at all. So I my flippantly cheering hooray at him may have tipped him over the edge, but we won't agree on that. He won't be persuaded.
And interestingly, of course, when we get to Tynwald, the other big-ish item is Stu's motion, basically saying words to the effect that we're going in the wrong direction, pursuing net zero, and perhaps we need to reconsider that whole approach. To a certain extent, he has a point, bearing in mind the election of Donald Trump in America. The whole push for net zero becomes harder to, I suppose, even if you are a passionate believer that we need to get our carbon footprint down, you look at the influence that Donald Trump is likely to have on this, and then maybe you think to yourself, well, we are going to get these extreme flooding events. We are going to have infrastructure that's robust enough to control and manage this. Maybe our focus should be on adapting to climate change to a greater extent perhaps than it has been in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I don't want to base our decisions on, because one country decides to vote the way it's done, it doesn't necessarily affect what we should do. I think what the first change of the first tranche of the net zero stuff was about finding data and pulling things together. And actually, if you look at where the spend has been on insulating people's homes, reducing their energy bills, and as a consequence we reduce CO2 emissions. So that's all good stuff, and that's actually helped, really, really helped those families that live in those homes that we've been able to help, and those schemes are still ongoing. The next tranche of work is around the mitigations and the adaptations, and so that will be flood prevention, that will be weather prevention, and facing the double whammy then of things like ash dieback disease and how many unstable trees we've got. Once it gets windier and wetter, then those trees fall over more often. So I need teams that can go out and respond to that, because that's what keeps roads open, keeps people moving around, but it's also what keeps people safe. And so the consequences of climate change are the next bit we're going to have to be dealing with, and that's where the fund then sort of almost shifts to where the work is focused, as well as decarbonising, because we know that's what's driving it, and it doesn't matter whether our what our contribution is on a global scale. Actually decarbonising and taking us to the point where we're in control of our own renewable energy sources actually gives us control over the price as much as anything else. So there are lots of things at play, but I think Stu's missing a trick, because he thinks it hasn't been, the money hasn't been spent anywhere, but actually he had to put the base level in order to be able to build. And now we know what mitigations we're going to need to face. We know where we need to be funding things.
And of course, you've got a great team. I mean, it's not as big as it perhaps was a few decades ago, but there's a great team of staff in DOI, which often gets overlooked when we have the likes of the big storm events we had a few weeks ago. The department's team are some of the first out there sorting out the problems, whether that be gritting the roads when it's icy or a bit of snow about, or getting out with their chainsaws to clear away trees, often in the height of a big storm.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think if you look across the department, we have a number of teams that do their business as usual and get on with things. And then pretty much all of them have some sort of response element about what they're doing. So if you look in harbours, there's the oil spill response. You can't sit there and wait till Monday morning at 9 o'clock when everyone comes into work to deal with oils. So they're ready to go when something happens. The same for the roads teams. They're constantly watching the weather, constantly ahead of what the situation is likely to be. And I got challenged the other day about, there's somebody in a DOI van who parks it on his driveway at home and he's using it. And it's like, but actually at 2 o'clock in the morning when the storm hits and the trees are coming down and we need people out on the roads to do these jobs, you want their response time to be as quick as possible. So we have some really dedicated, really impressively hard-working staff who go out there and deal with these things. And I'd like to say thank you to all of them, because they are literally keeping the lights turned on, keeping the roads moving. They're the people that are really, really helping the island stay functioning.
I'm guessing, this is the final question, I'm guessing you'll have a sack full of daffodil bulbs and maybe a few Christmas trees that you'll now not need.
No, I couldn't get as far as Christmas trees. It turns out under the Highways Act you can't plant trees, bushes or shrubs within 4 metres of the centre of a carriageway.
Right.
I was going to do poinsettias instead, to be fair, but I've got a lovely display now at home. No, what I will take the advantage of my position now to do is to unlock the problem, which is the coal tar waste that's underneath the road. And this doesn't just affect Portsmouth High Street. We can't actually finish the design for Portsmouth High Street because you can't put in the slit trenches that are needed to check stuff under the roads before you do the design, because when you do that and dig out material, it has coal tar waste in it and we have nowhere to put it at the moment. So I'm going to be working with DEFRA very closely to find some solution that unlocks the 15 or so projects, including Portsmouth High Street, that are held up basically because of coal tar waste. And we need to be able to handle that safely without putting our workforce at risk at all, and without putting the environment at risk for wherever we store it. So a number of challenges around that. But I'm really going to concentrate some effort on trying to unlock that and get a way forward, because that allows various projects to move around the island, and that work needs to happen. We're finding coal tar waste under more and more areas, and it is hazardous waste, and we do need to deal with it sensibly.
Russian MHK Michelle Haywood, who has accepted the big challenge at the Department of Infrastructure. So what do you think? Is Stu Peters right to question government's rush to net zero? Or is Michelle Haywood right that we need to take on the climate change battle? Should MHKs follow Anne Cullert's approach and be seen and only heard when they have something meaningful to say? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gorn. Thanks for listening.